This program is made possible by the partners and friends of Creflo Ministries.
You are affected by everything when you are in the center of it. Bitterness is a result of self-centeredness. Every grief that you experience in your life is a result of self-centeredness. Ladies and gentlemen, we are living in a time right now that we're going to have to be more God-dependent than we've ever been. You are not the source of your prosperity. You are not the source of your healing. You are not the source of your deliverance. Without Him, you can do nothing. But with Him, you can do all things through Christ, which strengthens you. Bitterness comes because the design that was born out of yourself didn't work, and so you become bitter. The plan you came up with didn't work, so you become bitter. The strategy you had that you learned at a conference, it didn't work, and you became bitter. Because I'm going to tell you, there's nothing you can do without Jesus that's going to work. Everything you do, you got to make sure Jesus is in the center of it.
I'm a world changer.
This is Changing Your World with Creflo. Now, from the World Dome in College Park, Georgia, here's Pastor Dollar with today's message.
If you have your Bibles, go with me to the book of Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 14. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 14. I want to talk to you this morning about deliverance from self-centeredness. And I'd like to start off by talking about the 7 things a wife does to her husband to hurt him, and she doesn't even know it. And then I want to go to the 7 things that a husband does to hurt his wife, and he doesn't know it. And then I want to tell you that whatever plan you come up with to try to handle it is not going to work. You're going to have to depend totally on Jesus. So I want you to pay attention, because there may be some things you don't recognize, and it'll help some things out. Number 1, the first thing that a wife does to injure her husband's feelings without even knowing it. Number 1, she puts him down in front of others. She puts him down in front of others. Now, most men will not counter this type of humiliation in public. They'll simply take it and they'll hurt, and then they'll address it out of stored up resentment, and most of the time it comes out anger. So number 1, she puts him down in front of others. Number 2, the second thing that a wife does to injure her husband and not know it, she goes behind him when he tries to do something at home. She goes behind him when he tries to do something at home. Always show him how much better you can do things than he can do them. For example, if he fixes the bed, you make sure you show him the correct way immediately after he finishes. And by doing that, what you do is you constantly remind him that he doesn't measure up to your standards. The third thing that a wife does to hurt her husband and injure him without knowing it, she constantly, number 3, constantly badgers him. Constantly badgers him. If he doesn't do what you want him to do, and you'll remind him again and again and again, because that accomplishes what you want it to accomplish. And to a man, that's very hurtful. Number 4, the fourth thing that a wife does to injure her husband without even knowing it, you use the "you always" phrase excessively. You use the "you always" phrase excessively. Because he always does, and the best news yet, it helps build him into a man that always will, because you always say he always. And that's hurtful to a man. Number 5, the 5th thing that a wife does to her husband that injures him and she doesn't even know it, she holds him responsible for her emotional well-being. Holding him responsible for your emotional well-being. He's the reason you feel bad today, and every other day you feel bad. So make sure he knows it, and make sure he knows it's his fault. And you don't have to tell him, just subtly just be in a bad mood towards him, and without releasing him from guilt, he knows that you're still mad. He'll take the hint. He'll own the responsibility. He will think it's his fault, even if it's not. And that becomes hurtful. I think it's my fault because of your emotional well-being. Number 6, the 6th way that a wife injures her husband without even knowing it. You complain about what you don't have, or you complain about what you don't get to do. You complain about what you don't have, or you complain about what you don't get to do. You see, a man has a desire to fix things. He wants to be a provider. Every man does. Some attempt to live it out and some don't. But when he is trying, doing the best he can, and yet he feels he isn't measuring up, he's crushed. And when you're always commenting on what other women have that you don't have, he carries the blame, even if it's not you don't intend for him to carry the blame, but he carries the blame anyway because he wants to be the fixer. And then number 7, the 7th way that a wife injures her husband without even knowing, you don't appreciate his efforts. Now, if you really want to injure a man, refuse to appreciate the things he feels he does well. It could be work, it could be a hobby, it could be a trait, but he feels part of his identity in the things that he does. And when you don't find them as valuable as he does, his ego is bruised. The reality is, a man's ego is self-confidence and a sense of worth. It's greatly tied to his wife. All those things that he feels is greatly tied to his wife, just as a woman is to her husband. And as men, we can be fragile people, some more than others. How about the 7 ways a husband injures his wife without even knowing it? Number 1, and I'm setting you up like a mullet. I want you to know that. The first thing that he does is he cuts her out of the discussion. When you act as if she isn't even there or wouldn't understand what you're talking about, she feels a part of her is detached. She sees the marriage as a partnership in every part of life, even the parts she may never fully understand. Even when you're watching a football game and she comes in and says, "Who hit a home run?" Don't cut her out of the discussion. Explain it to her because she's a partner. Number 2, another way that a husband injures his wife and not even know it, he fails to notice the difference that she makes. A woman doesn't want to be appreciated for only what she does. She wants you to appreciate who she is, but, and to be able to admit the thing that she does a whole lot. It's all about value. It's all about, will you value her? Whether it's decorating the house, making sure that the clothes are clean, or you might have a favorite soap and she does all she can to get a hold of it. A woman wants to know what she does is valued by you. You want to hurt a woman? Devalue her. You want that woman to come out scrapping? Continue to devalue her. Value is everything to that woman. Number 3, the 3rd way that a husband injures a wife without even knowing, you underestimate the small stuff. You underestimate the small stuff. You only said this, but it was this to her. It was big to her, and it hurts. And you may even think it's funny. And you know what? She may even laugh. But she's laughing oftentimes to build a wall of protection around her heart each time you do that. And the key here is that you can't talk to her like you talk to another guy. She hears, she feels deeper than we do as men. And words can and they do hurt her. So don't underestimate the small things, the small stuff. Number 4, you speak to her rudely. Curtness. When you talk down to her as if she is somehow less than you are, you bruise her spirit deeply. You know she's not listening, you are. You don't even think that. But she just can't tell that sometimes based on your tone and the way you talk to her, it just doesn't seem like you think that. So how you talk to her, your tone, your volume, it's important because when it comes out wrong, it hurts. Number 5, the 5th way that a husband injures a wife without even knowing it. You correct her as if you correct her as she is talking. I mean, this could be trying to finish her sentences for her in the company of other people as if she can't do it herself. She feels demeaned and devalued when you present her to others as if she can't compete with you in original thought, which you know isn't the truth. Most men know that their wife's a whole lot smarter than they are. Okay, let me speak for myself. My wife is a whole lot smarter than I am. The 6th thing that a husband does to injure his wife, he acts suspicious. He acts suspicious, and that's hurtful to a woman when you're acting suspicious. Now, don't misunderstand or misapply this one. When you hide information, even when you think you are protecting her, you cause her to question your motives. When you protect your calendar or act like you're upset at the question, what did you do today? Or what did you talk about today? Or who was that? When someone calls, it gives her an eerie feeling that something is wrong, and that hurts. When you have a code on your cell phone, oh, I knew we could bring it on up to where we are now. And for some reason, you don't want her to know the code. Seriously? It gives the suspicion that you're hiding something that you don't want her to see. And that's hurtful because that goes against the partnership. Well, Pastor, why are you talking about all this now? Because I can't get you to church no other time. Number 7. The 7th thing that a husband does to injure his wife, and he doesn't even know it, he admires other women over her. She sees you looking. She may even understand your highly visual makeup. It hurts her, however, when a glance becomes a stare, especially when it happens everywhere you go all the time. That's hurtful. A wife's heart, no matter how independent or strong she is tender in places, I mean lots of places. She can be easily bruised, easily in some areas of her life, especially the places that involve the people she loves the most, like you. You do understand that, you can't nobody hurt you when you don't love them. Some dude walking down the street, he can shoot a bird at you and say all kinds of things. You just kind of look at him like, oh, he must have an emotional problem. But only the people you love really can cause hurt. A husband who understands this is more careful in how he speaks and responds to her. And the question you ask is, would you allow another man to speak to your wife the way you speak to her? You have to ask yourself that question. Now, all of these different injuries is based in self-preservation. And every problem you will ever experience will flow from a position of self-centeredness. You are affected by everything when you are in the center of it. Bitterness is a result of self-centeredness. Every grief that you experience in your life is a result of self-centeredness. See, think about what I'm saying. I made clear the injuries that may occur in your life and you don't even know you're causing them. And yet I'm also saying that if you find yourself getting injured, it is because you are self-centered. Because when you're not in the center, you can't get hurt. When you're not in the center, you can't get injured. And what I'm about to say to you this morning, it's radical. And it's going to really cause you to think. Because one of the things that I have come to realize is that how Taffy treats me is none of my business. My business is how I treat her. How I treat Taffy is none of her business. Her business is how she treats me. How your coworkers treat you is none of your business. And what they got to say about you is not your business. Your business is how you treat them. And if everybody would tend to their business, we would be just fine. But even as I was explaining that you were struggling with keeping yourself in the center. But what about me? But what about me? But what about me? You know, oftentimes when you begin to deal with self-centeredness is a result. Every injury, all bitterness, all grief is a result of self-centeredness. But self-centeredness is a result of you falling from grace. Self-centeredness is a result of you falling from grace. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 14 says, "Follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord." Now, religiously, that just sounds like, you know, if we don't achieve peace and holiness, we're not going to see the Lord. But that's not what he's talking about. That doesn't end in a period. So that means you got to keep reading. Verse 15 says, "Looking carefully or looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled." So notice what he says. He says if you want to follow peace and if you want to achieve holiness, make sure you don't fall from grace. He says, because if you fall from grace, you won't achieve peace, you won't achieve holiness if you fall from grace. So what does it mean to fall from grace? To fall from grace means to fall from being God-dependent back to being self-dependent. To fall from grace means you're no longer depending on what Jesus has done for you. To fall from grace means you're now depending on what you can do for you. See, under the grace of God, it's what Jesus has accomplished, and I believe that. It's what Jesus has done, and I receive that. It's me depending on him totally. But to fall from grace means to fall back to self-performance, to fall back to self-effort, to fall back into self-centeredness. And now all of a sudden, somehow in your mind, you're thinking that I am the source of my success. I'm the source of my deliverance. I'm the source of correcting all of this injury. I am the source. And he says, no. When you fall from grace, you're not going to see anybody but you. But when you're in grace, you just see Jesus. When the doctor says you're sick and you're under the grace of God, you see Jesus. He's your healer. When there's lack and you don't have enough to get your needs met, you see Jesus. He's your way out. But when you fall from grace, you don't see anybody but yourself. You see yourself as the supply to your issues. And that's what he meant in verse 14 when he said, "Follow peace, and without holiness no man will see the Lord." He says, make sure that you don't fall from grace so you can do this, because when you fall from grace, you won't be able to see the Lord, because the only one you're going to be able to see is yourself. That's what that means. So if you don't want to be caught in self-centeredness, then don't fall from grace, because, ladies and gentlemen, we are living in a time right now that we're going to have to be more God-dependent than we've ever been. You are not the source of your prosperity. You are not the source of your healing. You are not the source of your deliverance. Without him, you can do nothing, but with him, you can do all things through Christ, which strengthens you. But for some reason, when we hear about the different injuries, the first thing we want to do is fall from grace and start depending on what we can do. And then all of a sudden, you know, the wife says, oh, now that I realize what I've been doing wrong, I didn't know I was doing that. So let me go home and get me a plan and put me some stuff together so I can correct all of these injuries. And I hear you. You want to do something about it. But notice what the Bible says here. He says, looking diligently lest any man fail or fall from the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness spring up troubling you, and thereby many be defiled. You know what he just said here? He says, when you fall from the grace of God, now you're depending on your self-effort to be successful. And when you discover you're not going to be successful in your own performance, you become disappointed because it's not working. You spent the last months, ladies, doing this thing that you thought would please your husband, doing this thing that you would thought bring harmony in your house. And when it didn't work, bitterness came in. It didn't work. I've been doing this for the last month. I've been cracking this joker's toes and fixing this dinner and running this bath, and he's still acting the same way because you're depending on what you can do and not depending on what Jesus can do. And now you're disappointed. You're angry. You're bitter. You know, bitterness comes because the design that was born out of yourself didn't work, and so you become bitter. The plan you came up with didn't work, so you become bitter. The strategy you had that you learned at a conference, it didn't work, and you became bitter. Because I'm going to tell you, there's nothing you can do without Jesus that's going to work. Everything you do, you got to make sure Jesus is in the center of it. But you become bitter. Let me show you what happens when you become bitter. And when you get mad, it's not working. You done tried to get these things straightened out. You've tried. And I'm sure you married people have had things, well, I'm going to get a divorce. And then y'all come together and talk. And then you try in your own performance. And you try with your own efforts. We're going to work it out. See, you're more self-conscious than you are God-conscious. And then when it doesn't work, let's just go and get the divorce. It ain't working. We just weren't meant to be together. That's why there's a record number of divorces, because you don't realize that it never gonna work. Ain't no marriage gonna work if God is not the center of that, and if you're depending on him more than you depend on yourself. But look what he says happens here. He says, when you become bitter, lest there be any fornication or profane person. Oh, so look what happens next. A woman who is bitter at her husband is more apt to commit adultery on him than one that is not. Because now that bitterness moves to that next level. Somebody says, well, why did she commit adultery? Because she was bitter? No, because she fell from grace. She fell from God-dependent to self-dependent. And when it wasn't working, she got upset and opened herself up to doing something she would have never normally done. Wow. Galatians chapter 5 and 4. I want to move with this, but I want to get this into you. Galatians chapter 5 and 4. And then we're going to talk exactly about what self-centeredness is all about and whether or not we can get rid of it. Because I believe in you. I believe you can stay married until Jesus comes. I believe as a single person, you can live the life of Jesus Christ, and you don't have to walk around in unforgiveness and awe and bitter and mad at everybody and mad at the institutions, and I ain't never gonna be married. I'm telling you, I believe that you can live the life that Jesus has called you to live, but we got to figure out how to get yourself out the way. See, I'm trying to talk to you, and you're self-centered. You don't even know what I went through. How you know what I went through? Don't nobody know what I went through. I went through hell dealing with this man. And you just, oh, Jesus. I got proof sitting in here today. See, the only way you can get mad at what I'm saying to you today is you have to have yourself in the center. I'm offended at what you said. The only way you can get offended, you have to have yourself in the center. I'm insulted at what you said. The only way you can get insulted is you got to have yourself in the center. You know, really, I can't offend you. You have to be offended. And if you're not in the center, then you ain't gonna get hit. Just realize I'm in the center. Let me step back. Galatians 5:4, Christ has become of no effect unto you. Whosoever you are justified by the law, you're fallen from grace. Justification by the law means you are made righteous by what you do. Justification by the law means I'm righteous because of my works. And the Bible says if you have become righteous or justified by your works, you have fallen from grace, because when you're righteous by faith, you are righteous because of what Jesus did and not because of what you did. So I'm righteous because of what Jesus did. He says you fall from grace because you fall back into your own performance. You fall back into doing things by your own self-effort. And he says, now here's the position you're in. Christ has no effect in your life. He can't have impact on your marriage. He can't have impact on your sick body. He can't have impact on your finances. He can't have impact on your emotions. Why? Because you've fallen from grace.